have an opportunity of a Mandela moment that Kenya has yearned for. We were so close to it. We were so close to it. Kibaki took us so close to it that policemen were being arrested by civilians for taking bribes.
On the one hand, there is this very focused, very intellectual policy wonk, the economist, the person trying to rebuild government in terms of restoring institutions, rule of law, repairing infrastructure. But at the same time, the man whose own state house looks so disorganized and chaotic, not just state house, even his house.
When the hope is so high on you, the expectation is so high on you, the level of frustration when you fail is higher. You are like the Pope. We're worshiping you. See, this is God's gift to Kenya at a time of its lowest moment. Then you see the cracks.
One of the most dramatic things in Kenyan politics and in the Kibaki State House, for him to call a press conference to declare that he has only one wife.
Certain things seem to happen around Kibaki at State House that we as editors got worried. Kibaki makes changes. It leaks before it is announced. You have these terrorists who are addressing a press conference and warning the police commissioner, you dare touch us. And you are the president.
My name is Macharia Gaitho. I'm a journalist, a long-serving journalist. I used to work, of course, at the Nation Media Group until 2015 when I retired. But like I say, I didn't retire from journalism. I only retired from Nation.
My name is Kipkoech Tanui. I am the head of news and group executive editor at the KTN. I'm a journalist and editor of many years. I joined the political reporting desk when Kibaki was the leader of official opposition, and it was a very, very reflective moment for me. Because here I would see a very brilliant politician, very engaging, yet very aloof, and you wouldn't really pin down on anything, very cunning in his language.
He approached politics from an intellectual level. He had his principles. He had no room for gossip and slander. He was very, very focused on what work needs to be done.
The Kibaki I know is largely shaped by what I read in the early 80s about him on the Weekly Review as the fastest rising African leader, potential for an African statesman. And I remember one of the Weekly Reviews put him on the cover as having been pinpointed as one of the Africa's best candidates or potential candidates for the position of World Bank director. And then he was also put, I think, among the top 100 most influential leaders in Africa. And remember, you're talking about just a mere minister of finance. And for the government, for those institutions to zero in on him, clearly created some intrigue. For me as a political writer, one of the things that interested me was his journey to presidency.
I remember when I first joined journalism, that was in 1986. Immediately I got into covering Kibaki, because I was with the Weekly Review and our specialty was political analysis. But for me, covering Kibaki did not start with my joining journalism, because I had started following Kibaki's political career way back from when I was in high school in the 1970s.
A very quiet man at that time. He would not be associated with the rebel politics of either anti-Kenyatta, because remember that is the time when JM was killed, Tomboya was killed, James Orengo was detained, and he fled, was to be detained, and Chelagat Mutai They fled to Tanzania. Jaramogi Oginga was detained. Ngugi wa Thiong'o was detained. The biggest question that people kept asking themselves was whether Kibaki would succeed Moi. It was being said in very low tones. And so that is one aspect of Kibaki, a brilliant graduate of Makerere University, playing in the muddy water of politics in a very gentleman way. It was not a rabarosa.
He was a very principled person. In that, for instance, he was a finance minister under Jomo Kenyatta. He was one of the most senior politicians from central Kenya, and nationally, of course. But he was not part of what used to be called the Kiambu Mafia, the mafia around Jomo. He remained independent. So, for instance, when J.M. Kariuki was assassinated, was killed in 1974 or 5, he was one of those who spoke. He was the only senior political figure from Central who attended the funeral. And he spoke very strongly against that culture of political assassinations.
He also attended the burial of Tom Mboya. He had friends that were very influential in the system, but so described as rebels. But he himself stood out. So there was a lot of interest on Kibaki.
The powerful politicians around Kenyatta came up with this change the constitution movement. Kibaki was not part of it. When there were these KANU elections, which used to be called and postponed, the Kiambu Mafia wanted, of course, to block Moi by fronting their own person for KANU chairman and their own lineup. Kibaki, the man who used to be accused of always sitting on the fence, made a very decisive move and went with Moi. So that was a very significant. It showed something that he may be a person who does not show his intentions. And we always accuse him of sitting on the fence. But when the time comes to make a move, a very decisive move, he will.
Compare Moi and Kibaki. Moi comes to power to the surprise of the people that thought he was a passing cloud. That cloud hung in the air for 24 years. Why? He became something else. Something that in him came out. How to wield power, personalize power, use power as influence, use wealth and other resources, vast knowledge of the country, and his rallying call of Nyayo and patriotism and nationalism to hold the country together. At that point, there's the Kibaki now receding. So they come to the third phase of Kibaki. He's been picked as vice president. Moi's power is getting stronger and his is diminishing. And then the campaign started. There was somebody who was trying to bring down Moi, that has been consolidating meetings. And therefore, pushed by Elijah Mwangale, former minister, they started talking about a political tourist whose only focus is weekend fundraisings in Othaya, to preach the retrogressive politics per se against KANU. So David Mwenje was one of them, and the other politicians. They targeted Kibaki.
Everybody was going out fighting Kibaki. They were sponsored to fight Kibaki. And the basic message was that Kibaki is not loyal enough. He's not Nyayo Damu. In fact, he never used to wear that badge with Moi's head. And we did that analysis. We realized what is going on. We came up with a cover story on the Weekly Review. Okay? The Kibaki factor, because those issues were being fought around Kibaki. And it was all based on fact. But for the first time I saw Kibaki coming out very, very angry. He called a press conference, denounced the story, and a lot of people, typically Kenyan, took the view that Weekly Review had been, sponsored to do that piece. But it was simply a very honest analysis of what is happening. And true to form, come the 88 elections, When Moi formed his new government, Kibaki was dropped as vice president and simply demoted to Minister for Health. And he took it in his stride. He did not complain. A lot of his supporters were very angry. There was talk that some were saying they're going to resign or refuse cabinet positions. He knew when to pick his fight.
To fast track, he announced he quit the cabinet, having been relocated earlier some years back to the health minister from vice president, another vice president picked. He addressed a press conference at White Rhino Hotel in Njeri, and it shocked Kenyans that there was no sign he was leaving. Remember, he's the one who had said, you cannot cut the mugumo tree using a razor blade. Now, what in context he later explained was that what he meant is you need the right tool to cut the mugumo tree. And he now justified leaving the Kano government to form his party.
Initially, he was ambivalent. He did not join the bandwagon towards a multi-party. In fact, he was seen to be against it because he's the one who came up with this, saying that you cannot cut a mugumo tree with a razor blade. But in December 1991, as soon as the multi-party campaign succeeded, he had no qualms about quitting KANU and forming his own party. And obviously, it had been something he had been working on in the background, because you don't just wake up and form a party. He already had officials, he had already had a large group of supporters. And for him to have done that in those days where the special branch kept such close tabs on everybody and what they're doing, particularly perceived opponents, I think you saw in that a very, very calculating politician.
Mimi Mwai Kibaki naapa kwamba nitakuwa mwaminifu kwa rais wa Jamhuri ya Kenya, Mheshimiwa Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi.
There wasn't an eloquent, well-organized personality in terms of thought and strategy as Kibaki. He would be deceptive in the sense that people would call him General Kipkoech, that he's a coward. He probably wasn't a coward. I think what he was looking for is an opportunity that when the path is clear, he emerges.
He was called General Kiguoya by Matiba's people because he had not come out directly against Moi. But he showed that he times his battles. You could say it is selfish sometimes, but it is strategic, and he did know when to move.
There was a group of MPs in Parliament that was very strong, the first breed that came after the 1992 elections. And you're talking about now around 97. And you had Kijana wa Malwa, you had Dr. Oki Ombaka, Professor Rashid Mzee, Church Captain, Njeru Kazangu, people like Dr. Valerie Oluoch, Dennis Akumu. And they would organize their opposition to KANU in a way that almost looked like a football match with Kibaki as the captain. And it looked like even the speaker appreciated that lineup. And therefore, on a big day on debate, they will be called in that order. Kibaki to respond. Wamalwa followed. You have Dr. Mugisa Kitui, Hoki Ombaka, very brilliant crop of Kenyan MPs. I don't think we've had people who are very strategic in pushing the opposition agenda as that represented in the 97 Parliament. One of the biggest events that happened at that time, there are two things. There was the pro-reform rallies, and you wouldn't see Kibaki in every rally or in every street demonstration, but he was like their high priest. He was like their godfather, protected and kept in safety so that he only comes out when needed. That's what probably was misinterpreted to mean that he was a coward. But he was the general that rallies the troops from the back. The reform debate goes to Parliament. And right up to the agitation and formation of the IBBG, which was like an armistice group, a ceasefire group by the old men, led by Onego, to negotiate and prepare Kenya for that election, where the 97 election, there were many bills that were coming, and there were many debates, many engagements, and you would see Kibaki as the single and Wamala was the movers. Of course, I forgot to mention Raila here. Raila was in all this as the member of Parliament Langata. And I remember this debate where Parliament decided, Kano, through the number of seats they had in Parliament, Kano decided that they are going to share out the seats within parliamentary committees using one formula, the numerical strength of your party in the House. So it required changing the standing orders. And to change that standing order requires vote in Parliament. And so both sides conversed. It was a big day in this country that I think at times is forgotten. Because that was the beginning of the diminishing stage of Kano. The debate is where it's in the afternoon, Kibaki speaks and says, you will come and pay dearly for the decisions you are making this day. Because one day you, Kano, will be in opposition. If I were you, you would prepare the laws of this country as if you are also going to be in opposition. Don't make laws assuming you'll always be in government. I've never seen a prophecy that came true like that. Because when they decided to do that, they set a precedent where it would later be the opposition, could not have its leader, Uhuru Kenyatta, as the opposition leader.
When he came to win the election in 2002, again it showed something about him. Not having been a part of the multi-party struggle, but the coalition he assembled was some of the key figures of that campaign. You know, there was people like Kijana Wamalwa from Ford Kenya, Charity Ngilu, who had been an opposition MP all along in DP, but more the civil society groups, the ones who had provided the strategic direction for the multi-party struggle, the ones who had provided the intellectual and strategic direction for the campaign for a new constitution. You remember all those campaigns of Sabasaba, Kumikumi, Nane Nane, and so on and so forth. The civil coalition for constitutional change, Willy Mutunga, Davinda Lamba, people like Kivuza Kibwana. That grouping actually was key to forming that alliance. And even by the time Kanu broke up and Raila and company moved to that side, he was already in place and nobody could challenge him for the presidential ticket. It was already a done deal. So they had to cut a deal to form NAC, and accepting that it will be a power sharing thing rather than any one of them challenging him for the presidency.
Until the Bakitosha rally at Uhuru Park, it looked unlikely, and it took a long persuasion. But the flicker of hope in his life was when Raila took his hand up and said, Bakitosha. When Kibaki was about to be declared president, remember the accident, I will not go into all that, and Raila saying, this is a guy who is, our captain is immobilized, but the match has to play on, and being rushed to London all the way, and coming back, remember the Mukithi dance and the way it lit up the country, the entourage, he appeared to unite Kenya.
And the winds of democratic change were sweeping the country, and Kenya was taking its destiny into its own hands.
For the simple reason that it did not look as captured by any tribal element. He appeared to tower above that.
Mimi Mwai Kibaki.
But let me tell you, the presidency tested the theories that people had on Kibaki. One of them was about tribalism. Remember, in his presidency, corruption became a big subject that people are not talking about now. Maybe it's in the African culture of death. That is the first time some of us heard that there's an aeroplane, the presidential jet, had been sent out to bring some loot from abroad. Whether Kibaki, because he was disposed, was not in charge, I don't know. There was the Anglo-Leasing, free primary education. A lot of good was happening, but also a lot of that was flying around. So that's why I say history should be fair to the man. He was mortal like all of us. There is one aspect of him that exhibited heroism, nationalism. But there are aspects within his leadership that appeared to favor certain communities. But there was a list that used to go around on appointments. And the joke that, like in Moi had this, but him, Kibaki, had more preference with people whose names started with M. I don't remember. And therefore, you have a presidency made up of two communities. And it did not help matters that when at the beginning of his presidency, which Gaitho has accepted, there was talk that we should actually deal with Moi in a very punitive way, including arrest, dispossession. But then Kibaki also said, no, we can't do this. So it was a very tricky period. Remember, it was the first time that a transition is happening where the president who is coming in was a former member of that government, and the one who is exiting is still alive. Moi succeeded Kenyatta because of the act of death. In a country like Kenya, you have an opportunity of a Mandela moment that Kenya has yearned for. We were so close to it. We were so close to it. Kibaki took us so close to it that policemen were being arrested by civilians for taking bribes.
Kibaki came to power promising to fight corruption. And that built him a lot of public goodwill, including this thing of pedestrians or matatu passengers arresting policemen who were asking for bribes. There was some very well documented court cases recovering some lost, some grabbed lands and other public properties.
Raila was Luo. No, he goes to Central and they cheer him as Njamba, the warrior. That was the kind of Mandela moment. But then all these other issues came up. When the hope is so high on you, the expectation is so high on you, the level of frustration when you fail is higher. If I don't expect much of you anyway, I will not be surprised and I will not feel pained I will not feel pained if you fail when you are my leader. But if I have taken you up there, I've used the word infallible, you are like the Pope. You're worshipping you. See, this is God's gift to Kenya at the time of its lowest moment. Then you see the cracks. And this build-up with the assistance of political machinations and competition into two Kenyas. This created a presidency of Kibaki where he's seen as more subtle but hardline tribalist, keen to maintain power under the Kema communities, or what they call Mount Kenya Mafia.
Then you look at his presidency, and again, you see the enigma. On the one hand, there is this very focused, very intellectual policy wonk, the economist, the person trying to rebuild government and undo the damage of the Moi era in terms of restoring institutions, rule of law, repairing infrastructure. But at the same time, the man whose own state house looks so disorganized and chaotic, not just state house, even his house, you might call it his domestic life. And it was quite crazy, kind of some of the things that were going on. The feuds involving the First Lady and his first controller of State House, Makerere, over this woman called Mary Wamboi. And for me, what I remember is one time I had put the paper to bed. I had gone home. I was just getting into bed myself, and I get a call from the newsroom. It is the late night reporter. There's a problem. Come. I said, what is it? Lucy Kibaki is here. I say, that's good. You have been looking for her the whole day. Now you have. So I jump into my car and rush to the office. Oh, I find her raging mad because of some stories we had done, and not just us, also the Standard, about mostly a lot. Well, the trigger, of course, was a party that had been held at the house of the local World Bank director, Makerere, who was Kibaki's neighbor, which she had interrupted that previous Saturday. Late at night, they were making a lot of noise, and she went and interrupted them. And she didn't like the tone of the story. It was picked up by the other papers. I think we had a lot of, we had to resist a lot of pressure not to run the story, but we insisted and we ran it. And it was that was a whole drama in itself.
After we had signed off the paper, I leave for Rome. Then our crime reporter, now editor, Evelyn Kwampoka, calls me and says, you know what, First Lady is headed to Nation Center. Remember, our paper had not gone to the streets. The paper that the Standard had produced was about to go to the street at night. But the one that she was furious with was the Nation. So she goes there, then she learns that the Nation one, the Standard paper is in the street, and that's why you had her telling the former police provincial commissioner Nairobi, Kimori Mwangi, go and buy. And so when I was called and we confirmed she's headed to Nation, I called the current CS Lance, Farida Karone. She was my colleague on the KTN side, and I was in the paper. And so we parted ways. She went to Nation Center, and the footage shows she was there, and I was at the INM. And then now she was saying, I am going to go to the Standard. And we were wondering, how are we going to receive her? And
so the Standard
the Standard paper was brought to her when she was in Nation. And the headline I had put was, First Lady turned seat on the police. And she kept condemning Standard paper inside Nation Center. And inside there, we had two of our journalists. Remember, there was an investigative journalist called Chachi. I think he's the one we say, the guy he was supposedly slapped. Then Farida. And then there was a history of headlines we had put there. Some were a bit cheeky. I remember Lucy on the Loose. I had put there. And some other headlines. My column, I was doing as a columnist in the Standard. I had done stories on comparing sort of almost comparing Lucy with the First Lady Lucy to the theatrics of the wife of the then former Romanian dictator Ceausescu. And you know, this lady had even reached a level where in Romania awarded herself she awarded herself degrees in the university. She did all manner of crazy things.
There was a very strong statement released by what I might call Kibaki's people. Not just castigating Nation, but castigating me personally for my attitude towards the Kibaki presidency in general. And the thing is that at that time also there was this feeling that the Kibaki presidency is ours as a community. So some of those people around Kibaki took me as a traitor, not because I was anti-Kibaki, but because I was independent. But knowing Kibaki, I don't think he would have been so petty to look at things that way. Unfortunately, he had surrounded himself with people who have that mindset. So it was covering Kibaki was a tricky balancing act sometimes, because as we say, sometimes we are identified by our surnames, and we are expected to toe certain political lines. And I think that is very much the curse of Kenyan politics. And it was not just during the Kibaki era, even during the Moi era. Even today, there are, for us in the media, there are difficulties because just because of our surnames, people will expect us to have certain loyalties, which should never be the case. Kibaki personally, I believe, was above that kind of mindset.
Lucy, who upheld family values, made Kibaki convene a rare press conference to affirm his monogamous marriage to her.
I want to make it very clear that I have only one dear wife, Lucy, who is here.
And from now on, continue to tell the truth, not lies. I've been hurting us. The president did not say that. You have been tormenting us. I don't know what to get out of it.
You know, some of us in the media, we never knew about Mama Lucy Kibaki in those years. Kibaki's family was always behind the scene, so you would never see them. Lucy emerged, came to public during Kibaki's first term. And of course, there are certain things that she did that I think as a first lady, she may not have been well prepared for. So she would not understand why she would be subject of a story, and yet she's not the president. So I think in her own way, maybe because of the ordinary life she had led behind the scene, she wouldn't expect to see herself on headlines or being subject to criticism. And this really used to give us a lot of headache on how to handle this. Certain things seem to happen around Kibaki at State House that we as editors got worried. It seems like the country was on autopilot. Kibaki makes changes. It leaks before it is announced. He says, we are told the president is going to have a live television address to the country at 5. It doesn't happen up to 8. By the time it happens at 8, the media have known who rejected what, whose name was removed, whose was put. It was a leaking system. Until you wonder who was his friend. You are told that there were people sitting and conniving on how to cheat him. Let us do this. And you had people who have formal position to advise you, sitting to do the opposite, to conspire.
But there were also a lot of things within Kibaki's government which were done very, very quietly, that nobody could know what is going on. When he didn't want anybody to know what is going on, he was very good at keeping things within a very, very small circle. Part of this was that his state house was not like Moi's state house. Moi's state house was like a marketplace where every political heckler, everybody who is looking for attention, looking to cut a business deal, looking to ask for favors, they're all meeting in the corridors. And Moi loved hearing political gossip and acting on political gossip. Kibaki had no time for hangers-on. He had no time for idlers in State House. He had no time for gossip and propaganda. So his State House was actually well managed in that way, in that you did not have every Tom, Dick and Harry walking around the corridors. Only those who have business there to do.
Kibaki had a very blessed term, but also a mixed bag of fortunes, where you have a lonely presidency, you do not have, and we don't need to talk this, paraphrase this much, you have a bit of turbulence at the family front, which came out that he had to address. It's not easy for him, for a man of his age, to come and declare, I have this only wife and 4 children. It tells you something.
It was one of the most dramatic things in Kenyan politics and in the Kibaki State House. for him to call a press conference to declare that he has only one wife. Obviously, the background is that there was another woman, Mary Wambui, who had become very influential in his reign and made it clear to all and sundry that she is his wife or his second wife. She was the one behind some of the funny things happening in government. A particular one was these fellows called the R2 brothers, okay, who came in and were doing all kinds of funny activities and even given a contract to train the Kenya police force. They were made assistant commissioners of police. They were the ones behind the raid on the Standard. That was one of the most embarrassing episodes of Kibaki's reign.
People close to him associated with thugs, mercenaries, imported from Armenia or whatever country, the Artur brothers. And they come with the backing of State House and put on and are given police badges, police honors within the government. Surely, what kind of people are you within that form of government? You have people, they are smuggled through the airport under the VIP lounge. Imagine if you are president of such a country. You have these terrorists who are addressing a press conference and warning the police commissioner, you dare touch us. And you are the president. And you have all this disarray, so many things going wrong, and you seem not to be in control. And so I look at times and I say, I think Kibaki had very good intentions, but at times the structures and social network within him are disintegrated to a level where he was either detached emotionally and so lost that power. Remember when he used to hold the fist, P, and just was buying time to let things cool, finish his term, and go.
Now, whether those guys could have done something of that magnitude without Kibaki's consent, I doubt. Kibaki, what I know, was not he was not hostile to media. He may have been indifferent to media, but we saw him as a champion of media freedom, a champion of democracy, a champion of human rights. I believe if he had been told that this mission is necessary in the interest of state security or in the interest of his own government's, of his own state house or his own family, he might have given assent. But now, nobody ever told us exactly what they were looking for. There were rumors that Standard was coming up with a damaging story touching on Kibaki and the first family. But they have never told us what it is they were doing. And even when Michuki justified the attack with that famous statement that when you rattle a snake, you will be rattled or bitten, he didn't say exactly what it is they were looking for.
When we are releasing exams, school exams, I always think about the Artur Marians, the State House cartel that was scared about the Standard story and the raid at the Standard. Then that day, the story that the paper that was banned was the second paper to be produced after the release of exams. And it was the champions of KCB speaking about the dreams. The dreams, their dream careers. So I don't know who deleted State House. They took our computers. I don't know who deleted them about what story we are doing. In fact, the epitome of shame is to see the papers that were banned, the picture and the images of the young children. Up to today, we want. You of course know that they took our computers, they took our vehicles, but you've never known what this fear was. In fact, when Michuki said, when you rattle a snake, you should be ready to be bitten by it, I think on the second or third day after the raid at the Standard, it seems to suggest that it was him who ordered But you wonder, can a minister do such a thing without the knowledge of the president? Because then it would be disastrous to have a president who is so detached and lets a minister do that. Or you have a minister that is too arrogant to even have the courtesy of telling the president about an action that would definitely attract public outrage and lead to a big dent on the government. So that on a balance of scale, you agree with the president. Do we go ahead? What are the pros and cons? So up to today, I always look at it myself and I say, these are some of the things that when that journalists should come, journalists and historians should document, investigate, document, and give the story of what actually transpired. All these things around the president. Who was giving these orders?
His reign came to be tainted by the Anglo-leasing scandal. That one had been inherited from the Moi regime. Kibaki had appointed John Githongo, who was from civil society. He was from media and then civil society. He was the founder, I think, of Transparency International Kenya and a real anti-corruption crusader, to be his permanent secretary for governance, working from State House, responsible for leading the war against the corruption. But when Githongo touched on the Anglo-leasing scandal, he found roadblocks all over the place, from State House, from the Ministry of Defense, from the Ministry of Interior, from the Attorney General, the Ministry of Justice, and there were even threats to his life. And he found that Kibaki is not backing him, so eventually he fled the country because he felt his life was in danger. But he had made some tape recordings of with some people where some of those threats were being made, and where he was being asked to go slow.
The other was inability to control the avarice, the greed, the jostling by those around him. And even doubts, reflect on what Githongo recorded. I'm not saying it is the biblical truth. I was one of the few people that at that time I could get access to, as an editor, confidentially to certain information. And I can tell you the agony that somebody from Transparency International by the name John Githongo went through, where you sit in meetings and he recorded. They're saying, now it's our time to eat. And there's a book by Michaela Wrong with the same title. So there is this other aspect where people who have been outside power actually come in and say, it is our time. And Kibaki is caught up in that mix, is unwell. I don't know whether if he was 100% if he was in perfect health, whether it would be different. But you look at all these scandals, they were so well choreographed, well executed. And I remember a phrase that Githongo used, that Anglo-leasing was a skunk that Kanu gave us, and we took it home in delight along with its very disturbing fragrance. Its smell, a skunk is very smelly. Because Anglo-leasing, remember, the Anglo-leasing twin scandals were projects that started in Kanu, under Kanu. But the eating, as history has had it, was under Kibaki. That is one dark blot on Kibaki. He may have managed to some extent. It is not possible to raise it 100%. But that very high level of corruption by those closest to him, including Triton, free primary education, Anglo-leasing, all these were very close to him, that it is almost impossible to say maybe he didn't know. But give him benefit of doubt. The appointments that came until the shocker when now he formed the GNU and brought in Gnanyachai to government, he was still looking like he's bent on a certain tribal list for big appointments, whether in security, in military, finance, office of the president. So you start asking, what changed then? When it comes to evaluation of a presidency, the president is left as the super intellect, the infallible being, and the problem must be that the people who have failed him are those advising him.
It was very bad for Kibaki. It was very bad for Kibaki because it really questioned his commitment to fighting corruption, where his own state house is involved and the person raising the red flag is being threatened. But to his credit, all the ministers who were mentioned adversely were forced out. His long-serving personal assistant, who had come with him from the single party days, from the DP days, that was, what's his name? Alfred Getonga, was sacked. Chris Murongaro, Gaitho Murungi, all of them, and many others were forced to step aside. But when it came to actual prosecutions, the big guns were not there. It was more like the mid-level civil servants.
Kipkoech told us he does not know who won. I don't know. What is clear is whether Kibaki organized, was privy to the election theft, whatever it was, the way the system handled inflamed situation. And I always say, look, why is the swearing in at night? Why switch off live TV? Why ring KICC with armed G issues? Why announce the results in a room in KBC? That, unfortunately, is what stuck to many minds in Kibaki than more of what he achieved in some people. As usual, when an African elder dies, people are very courteous, but I'm sure the undercurrents are not as honest and generous to Kibaki as we hear. Moi built on patriotism, belonging to Kenya. Kibaki was building on the economics of production. He did not want to give you money. He said, go to the banks. I've made it easy for you to get money. Work, you'll get money. Even those who are expecting free handouts realize you have to sweat for it. And that is what we've been told about personal philosophy, that he would be very open to you that let's go and have a drink, but you are the one, you'll pay for yours, I'll pay for mine. So I think that kind of disabusing people of the fact that power comes with free things is one success that we need to respect Kibaki for. It's a very painful one here politically, but because Kenyans are used to the culture of handouts. But I think it's a sacrifice that he made consciously, and it really made us as a nation. Kibaki made the presidency look accessible. You didn't have to feel that terrifying presence of a president to know that there is one. I'm sure you guys remember that there are times Kibaki would be on a street and you would not even know except 2 or 3 policemen on the road. And of course, he enjoyed the fact that there was no terrorism at that time. But he made the presidency very close to people. Even the language. Kibaki did not use threatening language. He would speak in generalities even when he's speaking about you. Na wale wanajijua tunawaambia. So you would not know. He talks in plural about the person who is making the claim and the people he's targeting. So he had a way of camouflaging this. It was a very tactful way of not knowing he's targeting people. And you have heard people saying, we never had Kibaki threaten somebody by name.
Kibaki being a lonely man is a popular narrative, but I wouldn't put it that way. I would say he was a private man, and a man who believed in consulting or confiding in only those he needed to confide in. He may have looked like a lonely man in comparison to Moi. Moi surrounded himself with a whole army of flunkies and hangers-on and wheeler-dealers. Kibaki did not. But he had the people he trusted and he consulted. And there were people whom he could see at a moment's notice, the people he listened to.
As a journalist, and which I reflect at times with a lot of pain, is that it appears to me, as an editor, that Kibaki led a very lonely presidency. That he was a very lonely president. And so it begins, one, with the fact that unlike Kenyatta, who lived in Katundu, Mzee Kenyatta, and Moi, who lived in Cabinet Gardens, he lived in State House. And he was immobilized for the first few months of office. And often he had to be taken out to see around and get fresh air. Kibaki, by virtue of his person, was not someone who had a lot of friends. He was a quiet man. You've heard about him in the last few days from friends that you'd sit with him. He would not contribute to a conversation. He would spend more time asking questions, seeking clarity, and not entertaining gossip. So he created he meant well for himself, but he created a situation where he would not be that accessible. I'll give you one example. The president had this desire that today I'll go and eat dinner, take dinner at my home in Muthaiga. And so he gives instructions that I am going to Muthaiga for dinner. So the kitchen staff are given an off. The chief chef, everyone. The kitchen is closed. And so in the evening, the entourage begins. A light one to Muthaiga. A member of his family who was unhappy on being told he's coming, reportedly, and I say reportedly because these are some of the things that we should, in history, come to put to the test of fact, was that the president, the member of his family, came, asked the sentry guards for the keys to the gate, saying there are some that are misplaced, and went up. And so the sentry guards or the GSU were left with no keys to the gate, not even the small doorway. And here you have a president who is sort of incapacitated. And so the first vehicles arrive, the sirens, and they find these other guys confused. We don't have the keys to this. And so meanwhile, the president is there, coming, 2 minutes away. And that when he stopped and he realized there is something is not being told, they're saying they're still looking for the keys, he said, Sasa wacha turudi. Of course, the president in his mind knew somebody had done something that would embarrass him at the family level if it comes to public. That the president gave up, resigned to the fact that maybe there's a bigger problem and he didn't want to embarrass his family, and just said, Sasa turudi. So turning back, it is said, and this is subject to verification from Mr. Esau Kioni, who was the escort commander and who is still alive, that he felt he needed to act fast because the kitchen is closed. Here is the president. No, there's nothing he's going to eat. He's going back to alone. So he removed his own money and asked some two gentlemen in one of the escort vehicles to rush fast and stop at Steers opposite Jibanji Gardens, a fast food restaurant, buy a package of chips, chicken and soda, and go and wait in State House. And so that was the president's dinner. So that case started giving us an imagination of the turbulence around the president and the loneliness. Regrettable that Kibaki has left us without writing a book. The only written materials we have on Kibaki are his speeches, which were put together by the Kenya Yearbook. Kibaki himself would have had a story told from his heart about why he made certain decisions, his background, because he's a creature of a society in which it could have informed what how he was, how he behaved, how he transacted power. Because that is the power of socialization.
There could be a number of books coming, which are in progress, not necessarily by him, but by people who are very close to him and who have talked to him extensively since he left office and even when he was in office, jotting down his memories, earliest memories, and of course his thoughts on all along in that political career.